Everyone has fears, whether it's spiders, heights, or the dark. Phobias, on the other hand, are a different matter. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, fear is the emotional response to real or perceived imminent threats, whereas anxiety is anticipation of future threat. This basically means that fear is an emotion in response to when the brain thinks there is an actual threat, activating the fight or flight response, while phobias are irrational responses to potential future threats. Phobia sufferers constantly worry about meeting or coming into contact with the thing or situation that they fear, while fear usually passes without much outside intervention. So fear is our body's response to both physical and emotional danger. It's deeply rooted in human evolution, controlled by a small almond-shaped structure in our brains called the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for control of our emotions, especially fear. Evolved because when humans first came around, it was a constant life or death situation. People who didn't have fear couldn't protect themselves from legitimate threats. In modern times, while the stakes are usually much lower, the brain still treats these situations as life or death and triggers the fight or flight response. A phobia, on the other hand, is a diagnosable mental disorder which can cause sufferers to face extreme distress if faced with the source of their phobia. The distress can be so bad as to even prevent normal function and cause panic attacks. There are three main categories of phobias: specific phobias, social phobias, and agoraphobia. Specific phobias are irrational fears of specific objects or situations, such as clowns or snakes. Social phobia is also known as social anxiety, and it's the intense fear of public humiliation in situations such as being singled out or judged. However, it shouldn't be confused with shyness, because this is only a personality trait, while social phobia is an actual disorder which causes trouble in life, such as avoiding activities you would normally enjoy, just so you don't encounter the situations which scare you. Finally, agoraphobia is the fear of situations that would be difficult to escape if faced with extreme panic, such as being trapped in an elevator, or claustrophobia, the fear of being in enclosed spaces. But when does a fear become a phobia? Okay, so a fear becomes a phobia when the anxiety in response to the feared object becomes debilitating enough to interfere with everyday life. A good way to think about it is that fear is usually rational. You may be afraid of spiders, for example, but you won't go to extreme lengths to avoid them. Phobics, on the other hand, can be extremely irrationally fearful of the object of their fear. For example, there have been reports of arachnophobes jumping out of moving vehicles just to get. Phobics may experience freezing up or an overwhelming urge to run away, due to the phobia triggering an abnormal amount of adrenaline released from the medulla. A normal amount of fear is healthy, as it can help us stay away from danger and protect ourselves from threats. However, phobias don't do that. They just interfere with our daily life and can possibly even endanger phobics and people around them. A study has shown that phobics would consistently overestimate the size of the object that they are afraid of when shown pictures, and even show the same size overestimation to photos of other things if it's shown within a short period of time. This indicates that even perception is blurred by phobia. Some studies also showed that phobics have drastically increased heart rate when shown these images. Now, going in more in depth into these studies.
Examples and studies done. In one study, researchers had 60 phobic volunteers react to 3 groups of images. One had pictures of their phobia, one had images that would be considered scary by most people, and the last had images that wouldn't normally affect people. The study found that the volunteers experienced more fear when faced with their phobias versus the other 2 groups. The participants who had multiple phobias recorded more drastic heart rate responses compared to those with only a single phobia. For specific phobias, heart reactivity correlated with reports of vivid imagery and affective distress. However, these results were not shown in social phobias. Another similar study used a questionnaire to sort phobic volunteers into fearful and socially anxious subtypes, and when shown images, only the fearful subtype phobics showed significant covariation in physiological responses, vivid imagery, and phobic severity. This study provided evidence that there is a biological difference between specific and social phobias. mainly the fact that specific phobias are more likely to bring the body into its fight or flight mode. However, these studies are limited as there were only one trial for each of them, with relatively small sample sizes, and they didn't involve the classification of agoraphobia, so some participants may have been miscategorized. In a different study, 30 phobics were studied over a 5-year period. These participants included both adults and children. The study found that phobias in children tended to improve quickly, with 100% of them being improved or recovered by the end of the 5 years. On the other hand, adults tended to improve more slowly, with only 43% improving or recovering, 20% remaining unchanged, and 33% worsening over the 5 years. The severity of the phobia didn't correlate with the outcome, however the degree of generalization of the phobia and fearfulness did. This study suggested that children are much quicker at recovering from a phobia, and that even untreated phobias tend to improve over time. However, this study also used a very small sample space, so the findings aren't exactly conclusive and may be unreliable. In conclusion, although fears and phobias are similar, they are actually quite different. Fear becomes a phobia if the anxiety and response to the fear becomes detrimental to daily life. Key differences are that fear is an evolutionary tool that helped the survival of our species, while phobias are a diagnosable mental condition.